Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Juan Guzman, who is Chief Judge, Court of Appeals, Santiago, Chile, and is currently in charge of the prosecution and trial of former General Augusto Pinochet. Judge Guzman is also a professor of law at the Catholic University Law School and at the Central University Law School of Santiago. Judge Guzman, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you very much.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in San Salvador, El Salvador, in 1939. My dad was minister, there was no embassy yet there, of the Chilean legacy in El Salvador. And therefore I have I have two nationalities. Chilean as a legal nationality, but I feel also Salvadorian.
And where else was he posted? Anywhere else in the world?
Oh yes, he was posted in many countries, and I studied really in about 16 or 17 schools. I was, for example, 7 years in the States. I was 4 years here in the Bay Area.
Oh, really?
Yes,
okay.
Living in, well, 2nd Avenue, San Francisco, Grove Street, here in Berkeley. And I don't remember the name of the street where I lived in Oakland before, during the war, or part of it.
So what years were this, and what were the ages?
This was from 44 to 48 here in San Francisco.
And so the area has changed quite a bit.
Yes,
actually.
quite a bit.
So, tell me, how did your parents shape your character, do you think, in retrospect?
Well, I am supposed to be something like I have two brothers. I mean, a brother and a sister, but they are much older than I. I am the only son of my mother. They were the daughter and the son of my father's first marriage. But I lived with Fernando, my brother, till the age of 7. Then he was married here in the States, in San Francisco, with Rhoda Liniers, born here in San Francisco, and then he stayed here for the rest of his life.
So did your parents not raise you, or were you raised?
No, I was raised with my dad. Yeah, with both. Yes.
Well, yeah. And how do you think he? What lessons did you learn from him?
From my father?
Yeah.
Well, he was a very sweet man, very sweet, very tender, but very strict. So I could say that I learned from him, I would say, to write better than other kids of my age did. And afterwards I worked with him for about a year as a secretary, and he tore most of the things I wrote, so that made me become more accurate.
And careful with your words?
And careful with my words and with the writing and everything.
Was he a poet?
He was a poet. He obtained the National Prize of Literature in Chile in 1962. His name was Juan Guzman Cruchaga. In Chile, we utilize both last names, our father's last name and our mother's last name.
And how do you spell his last name? Or
Guzman, and then Cruchaga. It would be a Basque name.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Yes. And was there a lot of reading in your home? A lot of books around and so on?
Yes. I would say thousands of books, like in your home, and lots of books related to poetry. My dad controlled my readings. For example, when I was here, a child, I had to read. I had to read because really one prefers to read comics when yes. Things like novels like The Call of the Wild, Treasure Island, and so on. So then that was the first part of my education, and I would believe, as somebody that wants to do something with, we say in Spanish, humanidades, not mathematics nor science, but would you say
Humanities.
Humanities, that's
yes,
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then where did you do your college and university work?
Well, I did, well, I told you 4 years of school, 8 years of school in the States. The rest I did in Santiago and in Argentina. I finished high school there, and I went to the university in Santiago, and afterwards I've done minor studies in other countries.
And what did you major in? Or what was your main focus of studies? The humanities in college?
No, at the university I studied law since the beginning, and I studied law, really, I'll tell you the truth, not because I knew what it was to be a lawyer, but because I was very bad in math.
I see. But you wanted to have a profession, something that was practical.
Right. Yes, I wanted to be a profession, at least to rely on, and afterwards try to do perhaps something else.
Are there any books of literature or poetry that stand out in your mind from your studies, both as a very young person and then in college? Any books that really influenced you?
Well, mostly some poetries, you know, and within the English poetry, I would say If has been prayer that I have always said and conserved and utilized or used whenever I think I'm.
And that is by, who is that by? By E.
Kipling.
Kipling,
that's
yes,
right.
Yes.
That has been perhaps one of the poetries that has meant something very special to me. And, well, many things written by Shakespeare. I used to say them by heart before. Now I wouldn't even dare to try. Monologues,
soliloquies.
Soliloquies, you know. I used to say them, but now I don't think I remember any of them.
You did graduate work in France, I believe I read?
Yes, postgraduate. But there I studied literature, but I didn't get a title, really. I was mostly worried of doing other things, you know, just reading, living, and working a lot. I did several jobs there.
One of our distinguished justices of the Supreme Court, Felix Frankfurter, once wrote a letter to a student and said, "No one can be a truly competent lawyer unless he is a cultivated man. The best way to come to the study for the law is to come to the study of the law as a well-read person." Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you can see that in our career, I'm speaking of lawyers in my country. I have no experience in that matter here in the States, but most of the lawyers are very illiterate, you know, in the way they express themselves, in the things that they do, and in their ambitions. No, in their ambitions, I meant to say. And, well, that makes them very poor when they are in a hearing sometimes. You realize that they have very little culture. No, I think that to be a good lawyer or a judge, it's good to have a good cultural background.
Frankfurter went on to say that he thought being a well-read person would meet, you know, fundamental criteria, which is a lawyer has to think clearly, he has to have cultivated his imaginative faculties, and he has to deepen his feelings.
That's right. Yes.
And reading can do that.
Well, I think it's the beginning, perhaps. Afterwards, I think you have to choose authors and see where your line of life is taking you. Now, for a certain time, I've been reading more philosophy than fiction, But I did read fiction for many, many years, and I really think that fiction has an enormous importance, especially when it has to do with sensitivity and with emotions. No?
Do you think that fiction gives you a capacity to empathize with the kinds of cases you see when you might not be able to do that because of a different background?
I think so. I think so, and you have all that literature. Anatole France, for example, Émile Zola, that tells you what is occurring in the 19th century, well, especially Zola, in France, and is telling you how harsh and hard life is for certain people. Well, yes, I think that people that have a little bit of sensibility have to empathize with the authors and with the stories and with what the author is trying to give you. I think so, yes.
Now you say you're reading more philosophy.
Yes.
And what does philosophy bring to the table, so to speak? How does it clarify your thinking as a judge, do you feel?
Well, it's a difficult question. I never thought of it that way. I thought of it mostly of something very necessary to be able to find your happiness, you know. I've never thought of it as how it could help me in my job as a judge. So I couldn't answer you.
Okay.
Really.
So really for personal reflection.
Yes,
then.
it's for personal. It's an old story. Well, I really went to France to study philosophy. I tried to change from law to philosophy, and I also, before I studied law, there's something I omitted to tell you. I wanted to be. I was more towards being, I think, a teacher. A teacher in literature, but teachers are very badly paid in my country. So I thought it twice, and finally I said, well, I need something that could make me help myself living and having a family and all that. And during the years I realized that, as I told you in a private conversation, that one really doesn't choose what to do. Most of the time things just occur, and you turn out to be, as Somerset Maugham would say, a creature of circumstances. I think that's what I am.
And you were appointed a judge, I read, by Salvador Allende.
Right. Yes, yes.
Tell us that story when he called you in to talk about the possible appointment.
Well, I was working here in San Francisco in 1970, a little bit before the elections, the 70 elections in Chile, and I was going to vote for the conservative candidate. That was Alessandri. And I was going to start, I already had the connection to get into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and went to vote to Chile as a good citizen before having the post and before having knowledge of what was going to happen. Well, when I went to Chile, I realized that I voted in Santiago. I took a bus to go to Viña del Mar, where my parents lived. And when I saw my mother's face while I was arriving to Viña, I realized that my candidate had lost. Then I couldn't get into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I thought I then had the vocation. I don't know whether I had the vocation, but I thought that the fact of being a son of a diplomat would help me in my career. I mean, I had some formation for that. And well, I found myself without a job, being 30 years old, being married and waiting for a daughter. I mean, my wife was expecting a daughter. Well, then I just looked all over and started. I worked first as a clerk in Valparaiso during 2 years, and during those 2 years I was trying to enter the judicial system, and I did start as a judge in the town of Panguipulli, that's about 1,000 kilometers south of Santiago. Well, the courts of appeal give lists to the president of the candidates that the court has chosen. We were only 4 candidates, and 3 of us were put in the list that was sent to the president. And nobody was appointed for various months. So then I went to speak to the president. I found a way to get to him and said, look, well, I said it in a nice manner, but to make the story short, I said, Mr. President, why do you take so much time in naming somebody and appointing a judge here? I have the need of working. I want to work as a judge. And, well, you don't take any decision at all. He smiled and he said, look, I know you. You are the son of a friend of mine, Juan Guzman, and he is not in my favor. I know he didn't vote for me. I don't think you voted for me either. And I said, you're right, I didn't vote for you. And then, you want me to appoint you? Yes, I said, I want to be a judge, and I think I could be, with time, perhaps an honorable judge. He said, look, if you promise me something, I will appoint you. And I said, well, what is that promise, Mr. President? If you promise never to punish hunger, then I will appoint you. I promise, Mr. President. I was judge that day, appointed judge that day.
And we should explain to our audience who don't know the history of your country that
Yes.
Salvador Allende was the first communist socialist president of the country, and he had just been elected.
That's right.
And shortly thereafter would be overthrown and killed in a coup.
That's
and
right.
We'll talk about that later, because it actually affects your current work, actually, in some indirect way. So you went on, and then you worked your way up through the judicial system.
Yes.
Explain to me the difference between your judicial system and ours, because in your country a judge can actually be presiding, but also assumes the prosecutorial function.
That's right. Until 1926, we had the prosecutor, that did the investigation, and he made the accusation, and then there was a judge that dictated or pronounced a sentence. Well, after many economical problems our country had, well, they decided that it should be just one man to do all the job. He was going to be a judge, but the judge was going to prosecute, to investigate, during a part of the trial or the pre-trial that's called sumario. It's secret and inquisitorial. And that judge has to either file the case and send it to the archives, or indict the person if there is sufficient evidence to do so. Afterwards, he has to finish the investigation, I mean, get to the end of it, and finally, he has to accuse. And once he accuses, starts the trial, the real trial, where people, let's say, the defendant answers the accusation, and then we receive evidence in that part of the trial.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, after the term to receive evidence, the sentence is pronounced, and judge dictates it's his verdict.
So the defense attorneys just defend the defendant against the charge, and the prosecution doesn't have to make a case because the indictment indicates that there's enough for a prosecution?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, is it hard wearing these two hats? In other words, in the sense that on the one hand you're preparing the case and reaching a conclusion, but then you're saying, but wait, there may be more, and it's the defense's job to then bring forth that evidence
Yes.
that would exonerate the defendant.
Yes. Well, it is a very difficult job, you know. It's like being an orchestra man,
Mm-hmm.
that you're doing everything. But you get accustomed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it seems practically impossible,
Mm-hmm.
but the moment you have to dictate your verdict
Mm-hmm.
through the final decision, the judge unfolds a little bit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the law is very severe. It says that to impose a penalty to a person, the judge has to have the conviction, the absolute conviction, that there is a crime or a misdemeanor that has been committed, and that person that should be punished is responsible. I mean, he has to have the absolute conviction. And during the prosecution and during the trial itself, many times the judge does not have the absolute conviction. He just, I'll tell you why. Because to be able to indict a person, there have to be three factors. One of them, that the suspect has to be interrogated, you know, without taking an oath. Second, that the crime or misdemeanor must be established by evidence. And third, that there should be presumptions that that suspect may be responsible. That's the difference. Afterwards, the judge has to have the conviction that he is responsible. So then it's a very different state of mind, really. Well, to order or detain a person, is that the right word?
Yes, yes, detain.
To detain a person, you have to have lesser conditions than to indict. Afterward, to accuse, you have to have more conviction than to indict. And afterwards, to finally dictate temptation and have one person have a penalty imposed. Well, there he has to have absolute conviction. So it's not so hard after all.
So in a way, one way to look at this is it's really the education of a judge over time about a particular problem.
Yes.
In other words, initially, in the initial part of his learning process, he feels there's enough to go on.
That's right.
Basically.
Yes.
But by the end, after he's heard the defendant's case made by his lawyers, then he's in a better position to reach a conclusion which is definitive.
Yes, that's the best way you could explain it. And there are other factors, you know. There are so many cases that a judge has to be doing the job of a prosecutor, or of a job, or of a judge, I meant to say, that really he doesn't manage to have a whole control of what's happening. We work with lots of clerks as a first instance judge. So then many times you have just interrogated the person. You have studied what the clerks give you when they ask you, we think that there is enough evidence to indict. Could you study it, Mr. Judge? Yes, sir. You take it home. Perhaps 2 days later you forget the name of the person you have indicted. And then that occurs when you have to study whether to accuse him or not.
Yeah.
And finally, the moment when you really do a very, I would say, complete study of all the case would be the moment when you really are prepared to dictate the decision, the final decision.
Are there juries in Chilean cases?
No. That's for rich countries.
And because the prosecution is done in this way, does it make prosecutions less political? The comparison I make is the United States, where prosecutors are often running for public office, and so therefore they have an interest in their political future to bring prosecutions, which they might not bring in a process like the one you're describing.
Yeah, I think it's less political.
Yeah.
I think it's in a way more professional, because the moment that you have also well, less political because the judges are not running in the first part of the work, let's say in the prosecution or in the investigation. They're just judges. They're not running to be elected anything.
Yeah.
You know. Oh no, I would say it's very professional. We have a career. Our judges, the ones that arrive to the Supreme Court, have been almost or always more than 30 years in the career. I've been 30 years already, or a little bit more. And I would say it is more professional in the way that the man that takes the full decision is a professional. He is a lawyer, he is a judge, and he's, well, juries are not. Sometimes they could be very emotional, and if there is a good lawyer that convinces the jury one way or the other, sometimes you don't know whether it is real legal, let us say it is a legal position, but I think it's less professional. It could be more emotional.
Where you were dealing with juries and so on.
When you're dealing with juries.
So after helping us understand what it is a Chilean judge does, what does it take to be a judge? What are the characteristics that a Chilean judge has to have, do you think, to be able to essentially lead a process like this?
Well, first of all, he has to have a vow of poverty. No, he has to take one. Second,
you're not paid well. Is that yeah?
Not as well as the other lawyers.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Yes. Second, you have to study during a period of time in the Judicial Academy. Before, in the times when I entered, no, you had to be working as a lawyer or having the title of a lawyer during 2 years to be able to get into the job of a judge in some far little town of our country. Most of the judges started that way. And as a condition in the character, well, I think if you're not very aggressive as a person, perhaps you're not going to be a good lawyer, and then it's better perhaps to work as a judge.
Yeah, I see. I see. Well, it sounds like though there's a lot of discipline and patience required in this work, and also
Yes.
A tolerance for ambiguity, as we say.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, and lots of patience, as you
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
You know, and now, for example, I work over 17 or 18 years as a member of a court of appeals. And there, well, most of the time we just have hearings as in the court of appeals of the states. It's very much like. And there you have to have lots of patience, hear lots of things that have nothing to do sometimes with the trial. And you have to study a lot. You have to try to do better decisions.
About how many cases, I know in the present situation you have a particularly important case, but generally an appeals court with not a historically important case, how many cases are you handling in a given year?
Well, I would say something in Santiago, for example, around 7,000 cases a year.
Yeah, I see.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Every day we have hearings. I would say around 12 to 25 hearings a day.
A day?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, it goes fast. It's a good job. There is the lawyer that gives us all the information, who works for the judiciary system. He's called a relator. I would think he has to study all the cases. It's a very, very difficult and I would say hard job, because he has to give all that information to 3 judges that have to take the decision. And then, answering your question, that would be what we see, what we hear, some 20 to 30, perhaps, hearings a day, and sometimes 6,000, 6,500, 7,000 cases a year.
Gee.
Yes.
What is the hardest thing about being a judge?
Perhaps the solitude of the judge. No, I think that's the hardest thing. You know, when you have to take your decisions according to your own conscience and according to the facts and how you consider law has to be applied to every case. So I think the solitude of the judge's solitude is one of the most difficult things to handle.
And what is the most satisfying part of the work?
The most satisfying part, I would say, the doing of a just decision, you know, especially if it's a new matter, if you've studied a lot, and if you've created something. You know, sometimes when you don't have jurisprudence in a certain matter, and you innovate and you do it well, well, that I think would be one of the biggest satisfactions that a judge could receive. You don't expect being a productor of happiness as a judge. You have to apply law, and most of the time you're not going to grant all what somebody wants, and most of the time you or not most of the time, but in a great measure of time, you're ruling against people, imposing penalties and condemning people, for example, for an alimony, I believe you say.
Alimony.
Alimony,
yeah.
Or ordering people to go away from a house where they don't pay their rent. I mean, it is a very, very difficult career. So I would say the most gratifying part is the intellectual part, the intellectual work you do and the study you have to do for that.
Tomorrow morning, I'm going to interview James O. Friedman, who is also an attorney and was the president of Dartmouth College.
Yes.
And he wrote the following, which I'm going to read to him, but I'll read it to you also. He says, "Both strands of learning, the literary and the legal, concern themselves with the dilemma of the human condition, the consequences of individual decisions and actions, the tolerance of conflicting views, the balancing of justice and mercy, freedom and authority." And he goes on to say that, so that in a way the work of the novelist, he says that these themes are the grist of the novelist's imagination, the poet's vision, the essayist's insight, no less than the lawyer's craft. Would you agree with that?
I agree, and I find it extremely beautiful.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. No, and very poetical, and very. You see that he is a very enlightened person.
Yes. Now, I'd like to move our conversation to discussion of this whole question of human rights. In a broad sense, you are the judge handling the Pinochet case, and I would like to talk about it in a general way, and not in any way, interfere with your role in that proceeding. Help us understand what the difficulties are in a country coming to terms with its own history and doing that through the judicial process.
Well, yes, it is a very heavy burden. I'll put it in images. I think you've read it, and if not, I'll tell it to you again in symbols. It's today I have the sensation of having been chained to a prison ball during 3 years. It's not easy at all. In a normal trial, or in a normal investigation, it is generally one person is the winning part and the other is the losing part. Here in this trial, there was a moment where half of the Chileans were for it and the other half against it. Let's say perhaps more than half for one thing and less than half for the other.
And we should explain to our audience that General Pinochet was the head of the country.
Yes.
He was head of the military that overthrew the Allende government.
That's right.
And so now what you are saying is that the country had been divided,
Yes.
basically, about what price he should pay for whatever actions he took.
That's right.
Yeah.
And but let's do some history, and let's remember that it was a great part of the country that asked for the coup. The people threw corn to the officers and to the generals, to the colonels, and it was very offensive, and our armed forces till 1973 had always been very disciplined, very professional, and very, I would say, within the best of our continent. So I think that in a way, when we see that so many things happened, so many sad things happened, I think that all of us have a great part of the responsibility, you know. I am indicting and I am trying some people that interfered in facts. I don't want to say the word crime because I haven't
determined
that yet. So let's say that there are so many people that took part in sad actions, but at the same time there was a great society, a big society, not wanting to know what was happening. Perhaps they knew, perhaps they didn't. But I think most of the people knew something of what was happening. By the other hand, it's not the army that was doing all that is being considered to be submitted to a trial today. It was certain people that belonged to the army as well as many civilians. So I consider that this investigation and perhaps the trial that may begin, or the trials that may begin, because there are many issues, I think this is going to be very good for our country, you know, because it's going to show the people that it's not the army that was against the country, that there were certain persons that committed crimes for some or some other reason, or followed orders, or gave orders that they shouldn't perhaps have given. At the same time, by the finding of people, of the bodies of people that have disappeared, there is a circle that concludes. You know, you have to have if a relative dies, an older relative, that's what's normal and natural. Well, you have to have a funeral for him. You have to bury him. You have to mourn him, and afterwards you could little by little lose the sadness or diminish that sadness.
So that in the course of this great social and political conflict that your country experienced at the time of the coup, some people were eliminated, so to speak.
Yes,
and
right.
so your reference is to the members of their families needing, as all humans need, a conclusion.
That's right.
To this trauma of not knowing what happened and having that final determination.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, as you do this, it sounds to me that this ball that you're tied to is really the burden of history, in a way, because because so many historical forces were at work at that particular time.
Yes, that's right. And well, there were and there are, and I wanted to finish telling you something. That would be what I told you, and that conclusion that you speak about is also very necessary. At the same time, there's another factor that's very important, and it is the factor that if certain people are indicted for certain crimes or misdemeanors, I'm speaking in general, it's normal that those people or the others will not want to follow them in the same experience.
Right.
So I think it's, as a trial, I think it's very necessary for our history.
So that third parties will learn that there's a lesson
Yes.
to be paid. There's
That's
a price
right.
to be paid if they engage in what is decided to be illegal acts.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me sort of summarize without putting words in your mouth. What you're really saying is that you're in this unique, extraordinary position of through the legal process, through this process which you've just described for us,
Yes.
where you manage both a prosecution and a judgment, and you listen to the defense, that in a way you're trying to find the truth on the one hand,
Yeah.
what actually happened, who did what, what happened to this person or that person, but in order for the society to in a way engage its own history and reach conclusions about what should and should not be done in the future.
That's right. And there's another thing that's very important. Through this trial, our people have realized the things that happened. There are many people that could have said, look, this was just the invention of communists. That has been a good excuse for a long time.
Yeah.
But if you hear the hearings, if you see photographs, if people confess, if others testify, and their declaration is convincing, the people start believing what really happened. It's a little bit of what happened during the Second World War with against so many Jewish people. It's the same.
What was done to them, but
Yes.
it also required the Nuremberg Trials
That's
to reach
right.
a judgment
That's
about what
right.
happened.
I was
Yeah.
I was going to go that
Yeah,
way.
okay, good.
And at the same time, to see all the evidence that there really is, because we have seen so much evidence. One of them, the Museum of the Holocaust in Washington, D.C., that today nobody could really honestly deny what happened. Well, I think that's very important in this case also. I'm not speaking of in number. In number, I think it's impossible. I think there has never, ever been something so cruel and so terrible.
Like the Holocaust.
Like the Holocaust.
Yeah.
But, this was cruel also.
Yeah. What happened in Chile.
I believe so.
Yeah. So in a way, it's as a professional judge, it's very important that this process of discovery, of gathering, the facts, is done in such a way that what is discovered is really legitimated,
Yes.
so that it will not be a decision imposed from outside, but it's almost like a common process of education. This is what happened to us as a country. This was in a way what we were complicit in, and this is the decision that we will decide in light of that, so it's not repeated in the future.
Yes, that's the idea, to be honest with a fair trial regarding the certain people, and showing our country what really happened, and that nobody is over law. That's something, a very important issue that we have
Not
to
even
do.
the political leaders of a country or the military leaders.
Nobody at all.
Is this process changing you? Are you being transformed as part of this process, beside the chains that you were tied to in undertaking this? How is it changing you?
Well, yes, it's changing me, as I think all the difficult tasks change a man. In that way, you know, I happen to be I like to have fun, you know, to play with kids and to kind of make jokes and try to be funny. I'm not very funny, but I try to be funny. You know? But, well, curiously, I have continued being that way. I mean, I need to, in order to be able to continue hearing and reading and investigating so many things. I won't put another adjective to the sort of things I have to see. But I have changed interiorly. I think that I could say that without being pretentious, that I am starting to know more what the human condition is. No, without understanding it, I still cannot understand how can so much hatred exist. I don't think I've known hatred. I think you don't know hatred. You have a beautiful look in your eyes. It means something you receive and you feel. Well, I don't understand hatred. And in all the criminal affairs, there is a certain proportion of hatred. Well, that has taught me, these 3 years that I've been working in this case, have made me see a little bit more in the hearts of men. I also have seen lots of compassion, people that are victims, people that whose relatives have died or been tortured. And it's incredible the capacity of compassion that many people do have. So at the same time, well, besides many other things I've been realizing, I think this case is very educational for me as well. I'm not the same man I was before. I've changed interiorly. I feel older in another way, not in a physical way, but perhaps I think I have, in 3 years, taken the maturity that a man could take sometimes, or that could take 20 years for another person to mature. Perhaps this was the way I had to mature.
Now, I'm not talking about the conclusion to the case, but what I'm curious about is what general insights have you drawn any about what leads to stepping over the boundary in a way in terms of these forces of hatred you're talking about? Is it that we're all capable of something like that? Is it that power corrupts? Is there any tentative generalization that you're ready to make without making a judgment on the case?
You know, just one, that I think that man doesn't know how to construct. I think he has the necessity to destroy also. And I think that's the only conclusion. I think that if we would have thought that the Inquisition and terrible things like that would have made a better society of us in the 20th century, why did the Holocaust occur then? I mean, I don't know. I think that it's a good thing to have a trial, but I think that we are, or have been always, with our values absolutely changed. For example, when we came here, let's say the Europeans, and killed so many Indians or natives for the fact or for the glory of religion, you know. It's, and at the same time we got our pockets full of gold. Well, you don't know really what to believe. You know, I think that we, Chile, now we are buying planes to the States. The States is selling arms
To Chile.
to Chile and to other countries. Well, I don't know. I think that there's something that we, the men, yet have not arrived to learn. So those are just thoughts that arrive to me every day, and perhaps I didn't think much about all that before the case.
So in conclusion, let me see if I can come up with one final question, which is, a student of literature becomes a judge, and I'm just curious as to, at this phase of your career, are you more of a pessimist or more of an optimist about humankind? And does literature, even though you're a judge, does literature help you, reach a balance in your conclusion?
Well, it gives me lots of interior peace. I could say that. Literature, reading religious literature. Let's say now I'm reading something about the Dalai Lama. Fiction also gives me peace. A few days ago, I finished reading First Lady Chatterley, the first version of it, much better than the last.
I see.
And well, literature helps me very much for my interior peace, I believe. It's like prayer. I've never, again, I tell you, perhaps it makes me make better written decisions, but not, I don't think they interfere really in the decisions by themselves. You asked me something about a conclusion.
Well, in other words, are you more inclined to be an optimist about mankind and womankind, or more of a pessimist because of this recent experience?
In spite of all, I am very optimistical. In spite of all, I think this issue of human rights that we were speaking about, and it's all really relates with human rights. The fact that the world is worrying so much about human facts today, I mean, makes me very optimistical. Makes me see that at least in our intentions, we have better thoughts than what we had in the past. And as a person, I am very optimistical. I've always been.
Judge Guzman, thank you very much for taking this time to be with us and to talk about your life and your current work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry.
And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.